back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring the Kyoto School, a group of Japanese philosophers who really challenged the way that we understand history, especially during a very tumultuous time, World War II. Imagine a group of thinkers who are just saying, hold on a second, the way that we are telling this story of ideas, it's missing something huge. That's the Kyoto School.
Interesting.
In a nutshell. Now we'll be unpacking an academic paper that compares their approach to history. With another school of thought. The Cambridge School, which really emphasized the historical context of ideas.
So the Kyoto School, they were fascinated by Western thought, but they had some serious critiques. They were basically saying, even when you Western academics try to be more inclusive by considering context, like the Cambridge School, you're still missing a big piece of the puzzle.
So what was that missing piece?
Their own context, you see. The Kyoto School argued that just focusing on how Western thinkers saw the world ignores how non-Western thinkers engaged with those same ideas. And that creates a blind spot in intellectual history.
They weren't pulling any punches, were they?
Not at all. In the heated Chokuran debates of 1941, one of them even declared something along the lines of, Europeans still view everything through their own lens, defined by their expansion. That's Europe's crisis.
That's a pretty bold statement.
Especially
during a world war. But they weren't suggesting that we just chuck all of Western philosophy out the window, were they?
Definitely not. They believed that the 20th century had entered a world historical period, and this fundamentally altered our relationship with the past.
Now that's a phrase. That needs some unpacking. What do they mean by a world historical period?
Well, think about how our understanding of ourselves has evolved over time. One of the Kyoto School's leading thinkers, Nishida, he saw the 18th century as focused on individual self-consciousness. Think about the rise of ideas like individual liberty and rights. Then the 19th century shifted to a national self-consciousness, with the rise of nation-states, and unfortunately, imperialism.
Got it. So each century had a different focus for how people understood themselves.
Right. And the 20th century, with its increasing interconnectedness, driven by technology, marked a whole new era of world self-consciousness.
So suddenly, borders seemed less important, and the world felt smaller.
Exactly. And to the Kyoto School, this meant our understanding of history needed to catch up. We couldn't be stuck in older, more limited ways of seeing the past. Another prominent member, Nishitani, even talked about a potential transition from a Mediterranean-centered period to an Atlantic-centered one, and maybe even a nascent Pacific-centered period.
Oh, shifting the center of gravity for history itself. That definitely challenges the usual Eurocentric narrative.
And another member, Tanabe, took this idea of interconnectedness even further.
Okay, all right, let's hear it. What did Tanabe bring to the table?
His concept of constructive history. He argued that history isn't just a linear progression, but a process of construction, where the present constantly reinterprets and integrates the past. Imagine building a house. You start with a basic structure, but each generation adds new rooms, remodels old ones, maybe even changes the whole style. The house is constantly evolving.
So instead of saying the 19th century simply led to the 20th, he's suggesting that the 20th century actively incorporates and reinterprets the 19th.
Exactly. It's not just a straight line.
Like those new rooms being built onto the older structure.
But the house. Or this is where Tanabe gets really radical, he suggested. That because we're potentially in a new modern age, centered on East Asia, maybe Europe's Middle Ages, and modern period, should be lumped together as a kind of new Middle Ages.
Okay, now my mind is truly blown. He's proposing a complete reshuffling of how we categorize historical periods, with East Asia potentially taking center stage. Makes you wonder how much our usual way of seeing history is shaped by where we're standing, both geographically and culturally.
That's precisely the point the Kyoto School was trying to make. They were pushing back against this idea that European history was somehow the default for understanding the world. And it gets even more intriguing when we consider what they said about the 20th century.
All right, let's dive into that. What made the 20th century so significant for them? Beyond these shifts in power and perspective.
They believed it wasn't just a turning point in history itself, but also a turning point in how we understand the past. And this had huge implications for how we think about our place in the world and our responsibility to it.
Okay, I'm definitely hooked. Tell me more about how they saw this idea of responsibility playing out in a world historical context.
Well, they argued that this new era, demanded a new kind of responsibility, one that extended beyond national borders and encompassed the well-being of humanity as a whole. Remember, they were writing during a time of global conflict and rising nationalism.
So in a way, they were anticipating the global challenges that we face today.
Yeah.
Climate change and pandemics, where acting only in our own national self-interest just doesn't cut it anymore.
Exactly. They were already seeing the limitations of those old ways of thinking, and they believed that philosophy, and specifically their work, had a vital role to play in navigating these turbulent waters.
It sounds like they weren't content to just sit back and theorize. They really wanted to find solutions to the pressing problems of the 20th century.
Absolutely. And they believed those solutions had to start with a shift in consciousness, a move away from a narrow, self-centered perspective toward a more expansive world historical consciousness.
That sounds like a tall order. How do we even begin to develop that kind of consciousness?
They believed it involved a few key things.
Yeah.
First, a willingness to engage with different cultures and perspectives, to step outside of our own comfortable bubbles.
So basically embracing the kind of intellectual diversity they were advocating for in the history of ideas.
You got it. They believed that exposure to different ways of thinking could help us break free from those limiting assumptions that often blind us to the bigger picture.
It makes sense. If you only ever listen to music from one genre, you'd be missing out on a whole world of musical experiences, right?
Right. The same goes for ideas. Exploring different philosophical traditions can open up new ways of understanding ourselves, our societies, and even the universe itself.
But I'm curious, what else did they see as essential for developing this?
Yeah.
World historical consciousness.
Well, alongside that intellectual curiosity, they emphasized the importance of critical self-reflection. They believed we needed to examine our own cultural biases and assumptions to understand how they shape our worldview.
So not just learning about other cultures, but also turning that critical lens inward and examining our own beliefs and prejudices.
Exactly. They believed that this kind of self-reflection was essential for developing a more objective and compassionate understanding of the world.
This is starting to sound a lot like mindfulness practice, being present, aware of our own thoughts and feelings, and how they influence our perceptions of the world.
You're picking up on a key theme here. The Kyoto School was deeply influenced by Buddhist thought, particularly Zen Buddhism, which emphasizes the interconnectedness of all things and the importance of cultivating a mindful awareness of the present moment.
Fascinating. So they were drawing on ancient wisdom traditions to address the challenges of the modern world. But they didn't stop at intellectual curiosity and self-reflection, did they?
You're right. There was something more. To this world historical consciousness, the third element they highlighted was a commitment to action, to working towards a more just and equitable world.
So it's not just about thinking differently, it's about acting differently too.
Precisely. They believed that true responsibility involved putting our insights into practice, working to create positive change in the world.
So it's a three-pronged approach: intellectual curiosity, critical self-reflection, and a commitment to action. That's a powerful framework for navigating the complexities of our interconnected world. And it's a framework that's as relevant today as it was back then, wouldn't you say?
I absolutely agree. In fact, I'd argue that it's even more relevant now as we face increasingly urgent global challenges that demand collective action and a sense of shared responsibility. The Kyoto School was ahead of its time in many ways.
Okay, I'm eager to dive deeper into this idea of world historical consciousness and how it can help us address the challenges we face today. But first, let's take a step back and explore another key aspect of the Kyoto School's thinking: their critique of Eurocentrism. They had some pretty strong opinions.
They did. And their critique is especially relevant in our increasingly globalized world, where we're constantly grappling with questions of power,
representation,
and whose voices get heard.
All right, let's unpack that. How did they see this Eurocentric bias playing out in the history of ideas? And what did they propose as an alternative?
Well, one of their main arguments was that the history of ideas, as it was often told, was like a map drawn from a single perspective, a European one. It showed the routes of European thought very clearly, but it often left out or distorted the paths taken by thinkers from other parts of the world.
So they were saying it's like looking at a world map centered on Europe, where everything else is kind of pushed to the edges.
That's a great analogy. And they believed that this limited perspective, not only skewed our understanding of the past, but also limited our ability to engage with the present and the future. In all their complexity, they saw the rise of the 20th century as a chance to recenter that map, to recognize the contributions and perspectives of all cultures.
Like they were calling
Yeah.
for a more panoramic view of history, one that didn't privilege one region or tradition over others.
Yeah.
But how do they propose we go about achieving that kind of shift in perspective? It seems like a massive undertaking.
They certainly didn't shy away from the challenge. One of their key strategies was to highlight those hidden highways of intellectual history.
Okay.
The lines of thought and influence that existed outside of the traditional European canon.
So looking beyond the usual suspects, the big names in Western philosophy, and exploring the ideas of thinkers.
Right.
From Asia, Africa, the Americas.
And beyond. Exactly. They believed that by uncovering these neglected perspectives, we could start to piece together a more complete and accurate understanding of how human thought has evolved over time. They argued that true intellectual history shouldn't be about tracing a single dominant narrative, but rather about understanding the rich interplay of ideas across cultures and time periods.
It's like realizing that the history of philosophy isn't just a single river flowing in one direction, but a vast interconnected network of streams and tributaries, all contributing to a larger body of knowledge.
That's a wonderful way to put it.
Yeah.
And the Kyoto School believed that diving into those diverse streams of thought could offer us new insights, challenge our assumptions, and ultimately help us navigate the complexities of our increasingly interconnected world.
It's making me think about my own education and how much of it was focused on Western thought. It's like we were given a very particular set of lenses through which to view history and philosophy. And anything outside of that frame was considered, well, less important.
That's a common experience, and it speaks to the enduring legacy of Eurocentrism in education and beyond. But the Kyoto School's work reminds us that there's so much more to discover, so many other ways of thinking and understanding the world that we might have missed.
And it makes you wonder, what are we still missing? What insights are we overlooking by not engaging more deeply with those diverse perspectives?
That's the exciting part. It's an invitation to keep exploring, to keep asking questions, and to keep challenging those ingrained assumptions about what constitutes important or valuable knowledge.
So instead of just focusing on filling in the gaps in our existing maps of intellectual history, we need to be open to redrawing the map entirely, incorporating those new perspectives and connections that we might have previously overlooked.
Precisely. And that's where the Kyoto School's emphasis on world historical consciousness becomes so crucial. It's not just about adding a few more names to the list of great thinkers. It's about fundamentally shifting our understanding of how knowledge is produced, shared, and valued.
It's about recognizing that the story of human thought is a global one, a tapestry woven from the contributions of countless individuals and cultures across time and space.
Exactly. And by embracing that more inclusive and interconnected perspective, we can start to break down those artificial barriers between East and West, traditional and modern, and instead see the world through a lens that recognizes the richness and complexity of human experience in all its forms.
This is all incredibly thought-provoking. But I'm wondering, how did the Kyoto School see their own work? Fitting into this larger vision of a world historical philosophy, what did they hope to achieve?
Well, they certainly weren't lacking in ambition. One of their key goals was to contribute to the development of a truly global philosophy, one that could adequately address the challenges of a rapidly changing world.
So not just critiquing the limitations of Eurocentric thought, but actively building something new, something that could encompass the perspectives and experiences of people from all walks of life.
Exactly. They saw their work as a bridge between Eastern and Western traditions, drawing on the strengths of both to create a more holistic and inclusive understanding of the world. They believed that by engaging in this kind of cross-cultural dialogue, we could start to break down those old binaries and forge new paths for human understanding.
It's like they were weaving a new tapestry of thought, one that could hold the threads of diverse traditions and perspectives without losing their unique beauty and complexity. But this idea of creating a global philosophy sounds so grand, so ambitious.
Yeah.
How did they envision this playing out in a practical sense?
They believed it started with individual engagement, with each of us taking responsibility for expanding our own horizons and engaging with those hidden highways of intellectual history. They also called for greater collaboration and exchange between scholars from different cultures, encouraging a more open, and dialogical approach
Sure.
to philosophical inquiry.
So instead of academics working in isolated silos, they were advocating for a more interconnected and collaborative approach to knowledge production, one that recognized the value of diverse perspectives.
And cross-cultural exchange.
Exactly. They saw the university as a potential space for this kind of global dialogue to flourish, a place where scholars from all over the world could come together to share ideas, challenge assumptions, and build a more inclusive and nuanced understanding of the world.
It's a powerful vision, and it resonates deeply with our own mission here at the Deep Dive, to explore those uncharted territories of knowledge, to uncover those hidden connections, and to spark those aha moments that can shift our perspectives and broaden our understanding. I couldn't agree more. And I think the Kyoto School's work offers us a valuable roadmap for that journey, reminding us to always be curious, to challenge our assumptions, and to embrace the richness and complexity of human thought in all its forms.
So what can our listeners take away from all of this? How can we apply the Kyoto School's insights to our own lives and our own understanding of the world?
Well, I think one of the most powerful takeaways is this idea that, we all have a responsibility to be more than just passive consumers of information.
Right.
The Kyoto School challenges us to be active explorers, to seek out those diverse perspectives, and to be willing to, have our own assumptions challenged along the way.
Absolutely. It's about cultivating.
Yeah.
That intellectual curiosity and critical self-reflection we were talking about earlier. It's about recognizing that our understanding of the world is always a work in progress.
Yeah.
And that we can always learn and grow from encountering different viewpoints.
It's like they're saying, don't just settle for the map you were given. Go out and explore the territory for yourself.
Yeah.
You might be surprised by what you discover.
And who knows, you might even end up redrawing the map entirely. That's the beauty of intellectual exploration. It has the power to transform not only our understanding of the world, but also our understanding of ourselves.
Right.
It makes me wonder, if the Kyoto School were having this conversation with us today, what would they say about our current world? We're more interconnected than ever before, but we're also facing unprecedented challenges.
I think they would be both fascinated and concerned. Fascinated by the ways in which technology has accelerated globalization and made it easier than ever to connect with people and ideas from all over the world, but also concerned by the persistence of those old divisions and power dynamics that continue to shape our world.
It's like we're living in the world they were envisioning, with all its potential and all its pitfalls. We have this incredible opportunity to learn from each other, to collaborate on a global scale. But we're also struggling with issues like nationalism, inequality, and climate change that threaten to tear us apart.
And I think they would remind us that the choices we make today, both individually and collectively, will have a profound impact on the future we create. They would urge us to take that responsibility seriously, to draw on the wisdom of diverse traditions, and to work together to build a more just and sustainable world.
That's a powerful message,
Yeah.
and one that feels incredibly relevant to our current moment. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of the challenges we face. But the Kyoto School reminds us that each of us has a role to play in shaping the future.
And they offer us a set of tools for doing just that. The tools of critical thinking, self-reflection, and open-minded engagement with the world. It's not about finding easy answers or settling for simple solutions, but about embracing the complexity of the world and working together to navigate those uncharted waters.
This deep dive into the Kyoto School has been a truly mind-expanding experience. They've given us a new set of lenses through which to view history, philosophy, and our own place in the world.
And they've reminded us that the journey of understanding is never truly finished. It's an ongoing process of exploration, discovery, and engagement with the world around us.
So to wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with a challenge inspired by the Kyoto School's call for world historical consciousness.
Okay.
Take some time this week to explore a perspective that's outside of your usual comfort zone. Read a book by an author from a different culture, listen to a podcast that challenges your assumptions, or strike up a conversation with someone who sees the world differently than you do.
Embrace that intellectual curiosity, engage in that critical self-reflection, and see where it leads you. You might be surprised by what you learn about the world and about yourself.
And who knows, you might even discover a hidden highway of thought that leads to a whole new understanding of our interconnected world.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Kyoto School. Until next time. keep exploring,
keep questioning,
and keep diving deep.